and the entirety of the UN's work in Egypt must be, by our own mandates, aligned with Egypt's goals. I had thought that in a middle-income country that I would be fighting for a seat at the table, but that's not been the case at all. I find that the government here has huge respect for the UN, understands very well the mandate of UN agencies. We are not NGOs. We are there with a mandate from the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Definitely.
And on invitation of government. Now, let me be very clear. Right now, there is no safe place for any child in Gaza, and no one will be safe in Gaza until that war ends. And that is, if we want a future for the children of that region, all the children in the region, Israeli children, Palestinian children, children in Gaza, that war has to end now. But enjoy your work and pursue your passions, and then you're better able to identify what you really want to do. And by the time you get to about 30, you can then start being a little bit more structured in where you want to go.
موسم جديد وضيوف جداد وشكل جديد لشغل عالي. تابعونا على كل منصات الديجيتال، سبسكرايب للشانلز بتاعتنا على يوتيوب وعلى كل الديجيتال بلاتفورمز، على فيسبوك وانستغرام وعلى تويتر وعلى لينكد ان، كمان على كل منصات البودكاست، ابل بودكاست، جوجل بودكاست وانغامي وسبوتيفاي. شغل عالي. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Jeremy Hopkins, a UNICEF representative in Egypt. Jeremy, it's a real pleasure to have you with us, and we're very happy to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I've heard that it's your first podcast experience as well.
This is
right?
my first. I've listened to many podcasts. I'm a big fan of the model, but I've never been the subject of a podcast. So very exciting for me as well today.
Okay, that's interesting for us because for today, you are the model that we're looking for. And we're looking that our viewers and listeners will have a lot. They will get inspired from your journey and from who you are and from what you do.
Well, I hope so. I'm here certainly to share my thoughts and ideas. And yes, I hope it will be inspiring for all of us.
Yes.
ما تكلمنا باللغة العربية.
ما نتكلم. فلنسأل آخر سؤال باللغة العربية.
لو عن حاجة جدية يعني صعبة.
I love your Arabic.
Done.
نتحرك يلا بينا. At first, when we speak about the UNICEF, Egypt representative of UNICEF, you're here for 3 years now. But getting back to the population and to the normal audience in the streets, maybe, do you think that the people are well oriented about the different UN missions and the different roles and jobs they have? Your everyday people you meet?
I think it depends, and I think that some agencies have a more visible profile than others, but it can be a bit confusing. I mean, in Egypt there are 27 UN agencies that we come together as the UN country team, and each agency has a very specific mandate, which is complementary to the mandates of the other agencies. And there's normally a history to that mandate, history in country, a history globally. Of course, all of us are formed by the United Nations General Assembly. UNICEF, I think it was in 1948 that we were established by the General Assembly, of which Egypt, of course, is a member. So there's a lot of different agencies. I can talk a little bit about how that works. I mean,
and we need to know the difference between how everyone work and how they collaborate together, because definitely when you're working in the same environment, working with the same culture, definitely you have things that you have many crossroads, right?
You have many crossroads. And of course, UNICEF deals with, or has let's say a responsibility and accountability for the world's children. And children, by definition, are subject to many different sectors and agencies, and even in government, many different ministries. So it does require, as you say, collaboration, coordination in order to achieve success. So here in Egypt, for example, we have something called, it's a bit of a dull name, but the UN Cooperation Framework, which we sign with government. And that is a series of objectives with targets and goals and budget and numbers of people and projects and activities in each sector that captures the entirety of the UN's work in Egypt. And the entirety of the UN's work in Egypt must be, by our own mandates, aligned with Egypt's goals. So, for example, we have the overarching document in Egypt, which is Egypt's Vision 2030. So the entire UN is aligned to that. Now, if I talk about UNICEF specifically, we are the custodian of children's rights globally, and we work with every member state of the United Nations to help and assist and support that member state to fulfill its obligations to children. Those obligations are outlined in something called the Convention of the Rights of the Child, to which pretty much every member state is a signatory, including Egypt. So based on that convention, which is a very clear set of rights outlined, which Egypt has committed to, and which Egypt, is part of even establishing, they call on UNICEF. Each member state, in this case Egypt, calls on UNICEF to provide the technical support and sometimes the funding to help Egypt meet those obligations, because no country in the world has fully met all child rights and all obligations to children. And so UNICEF needs to be there to help each member state do so.
So no one have reached it, even if they wanted to, because of their cultural challenges and economic challenges as well, right?
It's normally political, economic challenges. Cultural challenges, we see culture as an asset. Culture, every country needs to interpret and situate what it does
children's right
as a reflection of the culture. But the Convention of the Rights of the Child transcends that. It is every country has signed that in the world, almost. And so that means, and there's even recognition of cultural rights. There's a recognition that we need to do this in the context of culture and local context and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. But those rights are paramount and undisputable, let's say.
So it doesn't start with the UN agenda or the UNICEF agenda. I'm coming to Egypt to comply 1, 2, 3, and 4. It starts with what's the country is having. So in our case in Egypt, so it started with Egypt 2030, and then we see how we can work together through this, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It starts with it's a mix. It starts with Egypt committing to child rights, and then inviting UNICEF in, which we are here by invitation, of course, of the government, to help Egypt fulfill its obligations. And currently, because we've been here for 60 years or so, currently the overarching document that captures the vision of the Egyptian government, including child rights, is the Vision 2030 document. But after 2030, it'll be something else. But we will always have the Convention of the Rights of the Child, to which Egypt is signatory.
Okay. So I don't want to be asking the same question again, but how can we differentiate for everybody the difference between UNICEF and other main missions or agencies in Egypt?
Yeah, so we have, there are many agencies, as we said.
You say 27?
Some of them, 27 here in Egypt. Egypt is an important country in the region. It is a regional hub. So that's why there are so many agencies here. But if you go to a smaller country, they won't all be there, but the key actors will be present. But we have what we call specialized agencies, normative agencies. You have funds, programs, and agencies, actually. UNICEF is technically a fund, which means it is there. We do not establish the technical norms. For example, in the health sector, it's WHO that establishes the technical norms. We help the government meet those standards vis-a-vis children. UNAIDS, for example, has a coordination mandate. So AIDS was a global crisis. It still is, but it's perhaps, let's say, less so than it was 20 years ago. So the Secretary General at the time set up with the General Assembly this coordination body to make sure that everyone was coming together on the different components of an HIV response. Food and Agriculture Organization is there with the specialized agency, there with technical expertise on agriculture. Right? If there's a crossover between, for example, child laborers in the fields and agriculture, then FAO and UNICEF will work together. We'll have the expertise on children. Food and Agriculture Organization will have the expertise on farming systems. So each agency has its specific mandate, but we can only be successful if we work together. And that's why that cooperation framework that I mentioned that was signed beginning of last year, which is aligned with the Egypt's Vision 2030. That's why that's so important, because it's the one place that brings together the comparative advantages of every agency and the technical expertise of every agency and the mandate of every agency. And then we split the work up. We all work with our the relevant ministries according to the mandates and the different national councils. And together we get this result which is much bigger than the you know the total of the parts, if you know what I mean.
Definitely work on the case before you started formally, or you start as being assigned to it formally. When you first started in Egypt, what was the first thing that attracted your attention, or the thing that you wrote in your agenda? And I can see that you're having a very nice one. It has Jeremy in Arabic.
Yes,
Jeremy. It's very nice. Yeah. What's the first thing that you put in your agenda before you arrived to Egypt?
I think what struck me, because I very much applied for this job. I wanted to come here. I was very excited to be coming to Egypt. It's been a dream of mine for a long time. What struck me about Egypt and the importance vis-a-vis children is that Egypt has a very large number of children, right? It's almost 40 million. And regionally, with the Middle East and North Africa region, which is how we divide it geographically, Egypt has a large proportion, almost 40% of the region's children. Therefore, what we do, what the Egyptian government does for children here, what UNICEF does to support that, matters. And it's exciting because we can innovate, we can demonstrate, we can show best practice to the whole region. If we do our job properly, then the Sustainable Development Goals indicators in this region move because we have so many children in this country. So that was what struck me as I came to Egypt, was it's quite a daunting prospect because it's very serious.
It's quite big.
Yeah. But I mean, it's also very exciting and the opportunities are enormous. And I had thought that in a middle-income country that I would be fighting for a seat at the table, but that's not been the case at all. I find that the government here has huge respect for the UN, understands very well the mandate of UN agencies. We are not NGOs. We are there with a mandate from the General Assembly of the United Nations and on invitation of government. I find that very gratifying in the sense that we are able to do our job properly because we are facilitated to do so by this government.
What you shared is very interesting in terms of the size of the work expected and expected from you at the same time. And before we start our episode, you said something very interesting to me. You said, when I speak about the children, I have the most population here in Egypt, so they should listen to me. Can you find this happening? When you get back with feedback from what's going on ground in Egypt, you find there is someone who listens, and there are new programs that we can implement in the region based on your experience, or it's a mandate that I don't want to call it a rigid one. Definitely the children's rights are the same all over, but with the challenges the country is facing, with the population, with the number, with the diversity, with the great area that Egypt is having, you are a man with a big scale of work. So you think you can change something from what you came in, from what the people before you had started? You think you want to do that?
I know we can, and we are. And when I say we, I mean it's the collective. It's not UNICEF alone. It's UNICEF with our government partners and with non-governmental partners. So when I said that people have to listen to me, inside UNICEF regionally, if I raise my voice as UNICEF Egypt inside UNICEF regionally, UNICEF will listen because Egypt counts. That was what I was saying before, in terms of the proportion of children and our ability and the commitment of partners and of government to move positively. I think that there are a whole number of standard indicators that we measure in every country in the world to measure child well-being and child rights.
Can you share them with me?
Well, for example, under 5 mortality.
I'm writing with you.
Yes, under 5 mortality, for example. There will be school enrollment. Enrollment of girls in school, differential in primary and secondary. We would have nutritional status of children. We would have numbers of children who have been exposed to violent discipline. So a whole series of indicators like these. And I can tell you that, things are not perfect for children in this country, but most indicators, almost every indicator over the decades, has been moving in the right direction.
Perfect.
Strongly.
It's great to hear.
Having said that, right now, we are in a difficult time.
Yeah.
There are socioeconomic challenges. We know about food prices and inflation.
Yes, I can tell you with the nutritional factor. Yes, I can tell there is a crisis now.
Yes, and so we need to be very aware of that. And respond accordingly. So when we designed the country program, which is that we're currently in, the one that goes from 2023 to 2027, we designed in 2022. Things have changed, and we need to be able to adapt. So your question was, how rigid is the mandate? How well are we able to adapt? I tell you, one of the professional competencies that we measure in all our professional staff is innovation, and another one is dealing with complexity and ambiguity.
Yeah.
And we are expected to be able to manage these. So that's to say that we are absolutely not expected to be rigid. The mandate is clear. It's outlined in that Convention, the Rights of the Child. But the way we reach every child and the way we ensure that the most vulnerable children's rights are met has to be according to the context and has to change over time. So we really highly value innovation. And, some of these indicators that have improved even during the 3 years that I've been here. If you look, for example, at the work we do around girls' empowerment with the National Council for Childhood and Motherhood and the National Council for Women and others, the progress has been quite positive. I mean, we are reaching to
quite seen, by the way.
Quite seen, which is important, but it's not all about seeing. It's about the substance as well. But you have to balance. So we know that program, for example, has very senior political commitment. We have a model that we developed over several years. It has been adapted and reacted to as we move forward. But now we're reaching into the millions of girls through the online mechanism, at least. And in the face-to-face, it's in the hundreds of thousands. That's pretty impressive. And that's change that we've seen just over a 3-year period.
Yeah.
And in every sector, there'll be some change. If you look at the child protection management system, there are children who are exposed to violence and exploitation and neglect and abuse.
In this aspect, do you collaborate with the NGOs that work in the awareness and stuff like that? You fund those NGOs, you have programs for them, or you listen for them? Because in this aspect especially, we have many NGOs and people that work for the program. Definitely by the mandate.
We do, yes, we do. And we don't foresee any model of UNICEF in any country that doesn't work with NGOs as well. The voice of civil society is extremely important, and it's not either or. We are there for government, but part of our role to promote child rights is to make sure that civil society has the space to operate and fills the gaps, because there will always be gaps. And so, yes, we work with plenty of civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations in the delivery of services, many of them affiliated to the Ministry of Social Solidarity, some international NGOs as well. And we feel it's important that civil society continues to have that role, because you go to even the richest country in the world, civil society has a role to play.
Definitely. And whenever we see the role between the civil society and the government and the private sector balanced, this is the triangle of growth and development. Definitely.
Well, thanks for bringing up the private sector, because indeed.
Do you collaborate with them?
We collaborate with the private sector, and I think there's a firm belief by anybody with analytical competencies that we will not achieve the sustainable development goals for every person in the world unless the private sector is there. The bulk of any socio-economy and the direction that it's going in is related to the private sector. Of course, the government has a role to play in establishing the parameters and the ease of doing business, etc. But if the private sector isn't there, we won't get there. So does UNICEF collaborate with the private sector? Very much so. We have a number of partners who fund us directly, but we also have platforms where we come together to discuss our joint interests. It's not about private sector giving money to charity. It's about the private sector establishing what is profitable for them that equals progress against the sustainable development goals.
Definitely. And I can see the model of what you're saying is private sector trusting UNICEF to regulate or to direct the fund for a sustainable goal or cause. I think this is a perfect model. I'm very happy to hear that you're cooperating with private sector. I didn't know that.
We are. And, one example of that is Shabab Balad, which we were chatting about just before. So Shabab Balad is precisely a platform that brings together the public sector, which means government, UN, development partners, donors, young people, and the private sector. That is its explicit definition. It's a three-way platform, recognizing that for young people, to accompany young people on that journey from learning to earning, as we call it, from, transitioning into adulthood, gaining the skills and competencies they need, both the soft skills, but also the hard technical skills in those key teenage years and going into the early 20s, you have to have the private sector there. They know what they want from the market.
Yes.
We are not experts
and they
in that
know
domain.
where they want to invest.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to youth. Yeah.
Yes. And if they see that it is if they see it is profitable, in inverted commas, for them to invest in skilling young people in X and Y, and we provide we meaning the public sector, government, UNICEF and others, provide the technical expertise to make sure it's done properly. It's a perfect marriage, if you like.
I find it's very interesting, and I feel like I got comforted when you were speaking about this kind of collaboration with the government, with the private sector, and especially the programs you're coming with. Maybe something out of context for us today, because I know you are Egypt representative of UNICEF, but we cannot be blindfolded of what's going on with the neighborhood in Gaza. And speaking about the Egyptian children, although we are speaking about many challenges, yet it's uncomparable to what's happening there. Can you share with me, does UNICEF Egypt has a role in what's going on, or it's beyond your scope of work?
Well, I'll certainly share. I mean, I think the beauty of UNICEF is we are an international. We have international presence. We're present in, I think, more than 140 countries, and of course, we have an office in the state of Palestine and a field office in Gaza, and we've always had, or at least let's say for many, many years. So I am UNICEF Egypt. My legal accountability is for children in Egypt of any nationality, but children in Egypt. Yeah. But of course, I'm also part of an organization that has accountabilities globally. So to answer your question, and if I may, I'm going to go slightly broader. We've had two crises on our borders in the last 12 months. One is Sudan and one is Gaza. And in both instances, UNICEF Egypt has had to step up. And I've been actually really pleased that we've had that opportunity to help, because the situation of children in Sudan and in Gaza is absolutely terrible. It's unimaginable. Yeah. And it's very frustrating, of course, to see this unfolding and to feel that we can't do anything about it. Now, at UNICEF, we can. Luckily, I work for an organization that is engaged. So have we been engaged in Gaza? Not, of course, inside Gaza, not UNICEF Egypt, but UNICEF most definitely. But as we know, the principal route at the moment for sending supplies into Gaza as part of the humanitarian response is indeed through Egypt, Rafah. And so at the beginning, we worked very closely with the Egyptian authorities, with the Egyptian Red Crescent, and with my colleagues in UNICEF State of Palestine, other parts of the United Nations, to set up the logistics of the support that we provide through that humanitarian corridor. Then, of course, we receive staff coming out and rotating in, and those people are, working in very difficult circumstances. So we need to be there to support them. And then, we have, let's say, a very, very small scale response for the few people who are, for example, being medevaced out of Gaza. Yes. We work strictly with the ministries, Egyptian Red Crescent, to bolster their capacity to provide that response, which we hope will stay small, whilst the bulk of the humanitarian response should be and is inside Gaza. Yes. Now, let me be very clear. Right now, there is no safe place for any child in Gaza, and no one will be safe in Gaza until that war ends. And that is, if we want a future for the children of that region, all the children in the region, Israeli children, Palestinian children, children in Gaza, that war has to end now. Sudan, if I may touch on that briefly, is the scale of the problem is even bigger. We're talking about 17 million people who need humanitarian support. And we're talking about, I think, 9 million people who've been displaced, 3 million children who are malnourished. So, again, the beauty of UNICEF is we're there for every child in the world, right? And we, obviously, right now, my focus and our focus is somewhat on supporting Gaza from what we can do inside Egypt. But UNICEF globally has that accountability for every child in every country. And there are multiple instances of suffering around the world, and we have to be there for all those children.
What you have just shared is heartbreaking, because even when we call it's you're a leader in your position, and every leader in his position is having the same side of the story. They want to end the war now. Why do you think no one listens? Why do you think it's coming to an endless end? It's not coming to any resolution so far. What's hindering the stopping the war for the safety of children and women, just for the safety, not for any other political issue?
I think parties to the conflict need to put human rights and child rights first, and they are not. That's the short answer. But I have to say, it's not unique to this conflict. I mean, there are so many conflicts around the world where we all say, please stop, and they don't stop. Right? We don't have that sort of leverage. Some member states have more leverage than others, but at the end of the day, it is about the member states taking accountability for their commitments to human rights and to children from a UNICEF perspective. And that's not happening for sure. And it has to.
Let's dream high. Can we find one day a tool, the humanitarian initiatives in all terms and ways may have the upper hand and upper role in deciding who and what and why and when? Or it's very hard?
You know, I think the reason the humanitarian work can only stay, let's say, up to a certain standard and successful if we stay out of the politics. Once we put our foot into the politics, the humanitarian response is compromised, if not in this country, in the next country. So I mean, we need to dream big. The international community and
But
Egypt.
It's interesting what you're sharing.
I mean,
you should be away from the politics.
We have to. We have to, because you know, if we intervene in politics once, we are on a slippery slope. That's not to not recognize that politics isn't absolutely paramount. Of course, this is all politics. We have to situate our work in a political environment, but I don't want us to be engaging in those politics. I want us to be engaging in if you like, the politics of a humanitarian response. Yes, in the humanitarian response, that is where we have a role. Other parts of the United Nations do have a political role, of course, and they are doing their best to play it. But at the end of the day, we are only as strong as the member states who are part of the United Nations.
That's logic, and I very appreciate so much that you're bringing logic to the table, not just the emotional part of we feel the pain, but we should be logical to understand our personal roles. For those long years of career working in the UN agencies, can we go a little for your personal career life?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
So, Jeremy, you started your career. You are the real definition of a global citizen, by the way. I would love to share with our viewers and listeners the great combination we have. You were born in Kenya, or you have half Kenyan, half British?
So right? I'm half Kenyan, half English. I'm British national. I was born in Switzerland. And I grew up in Italy, and I went to boarding school in England, and I went to university in Scotland. So, fairly mixed, but all for logical reasons at the time. You know, my parents were moving around a bit. But I do feel that I have the blessings and the benefits of being quite internationally exposed, let's say, during my upbringing, which gives me hopefully an international and a perspective and a healthy respect for diversity, diverse views and opinions, which is so important.
Diverse by nature.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So, I mean, my home and my heart is in Kenya, and that's where my parents are, and my broader most of my broader family are there. But yes, somewhat a citizen of the world or something like that. Having said that, I know mostly the countries in the region around Kenya, Africa, a little bit of the Middle East, Europe. I don't know too much about Asia, South America, North America. I haven't traveled. I travel a lot, but I've traveled mostly, let's say, this time zone. Africa and Europe. Yes, right? Basically, yes, and the Middle East.
Okay. So, as your heart belongs to Africa, as you said, this is very interesting. What's the most, the common factor that you can write and I can see that you also served in Africa in many countries, right?
Yes.
And here comes to Egypt. What's the line that you can see common between all those countries? Given that they are diverse as well, they have some of them are speaking French, some English, and some Arabic. What's the one thing that you can see common?
So before I answer that question, I strive for a world where there's no such thing as a national stereotype. which I know, and national stereotyping is fun. We all do it, and it's part of the way we kind of get through in life.
It's very interesting what you shared, because it's different from the cultural uniqueness. Stereotyping is hard and maybe limiting, right?
I think it's limiting, but even when it's not intended to be limiting, it can be positive stereotyping. I think that's still limiting. You know, if we say a certain nation is very on time, you know, that sounds like an innocent, nice thing to say. But what about the people who are from that nation who are not on time? How do they feel about that stereotype? You know, so I just prefer not to do it.
Yeah, I have suffered from it many times, because every time when I'm outside Egypt, when I say I'm an Egyptian woman, they say, "Oh wow, you have camels in the street,"
Exactly.
and
it's nonsense.
But you're not like Egyptians. They think they have an image about the Egyptians that they are only pharaohs.
Yes, exactly. Or whatever it is. Yes. And each country suffers from that. So, but I mean, to talk about Africa and commonalities, I think what I love about Africa is its people. I mean, I love all people by definition. I work for the United Nations, so I must, and I do. But I think that's the commonality that I see. Geographically, there's not much in common between, you know, what Egypt looks like and what Zimbabwe looks like and what Central Africa. You know, these are very diverse.
And it's never the case, right? We cannot comply one thing for a group of people, because the ethnics or sometimes we try to find something in common. Maybe to unite us or not.
You know, for nation building, it's important. You know, so a country like Kenya, for example, it has, I think, 30-something different ethnic groups. It's very important to find a way to bring people together and coalesce around a national identity. You know, so of course I see the practical reasons for it, but I myself, perhaps because I don't fall under any particular definition of any particular group, I tend to push back, including in Egypt in my conversations with my friends. But I think Africa has its people are its biggest bonus. I mean, and I believe that moving forward, you know, we talk about the 21st century being Africa's century. I mean, Africa is going places.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
What do you think have hindered Africa from going that places in the past decade? Not decades, more than
decades. Well, I mean, you know, the early 20th century, of course, was mostly defined by colonialism, right? Which you know, we know is not a model that we can support or that yields benefit. I think since then, it's, you know, if we look at the longer span of history, it's only been 50 years or 70 years since colonialism, more or less, you know, ended in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's a very short time period. And I think now I don't think it's hinder. I think hinder is perhaps not the word I would use, but what has perhaps made progress slower than we would have liked, it's nation building, and it takes time. Yeah. You know, some European countries have had the benefit of 2,000 years or 1,000 years to build their nation. Trying to do it in 50 or 70 years is a challenge, and I think many countries have done well, some not so well.
Yeah, being concerned with the main part of the future, a main component of the future, the children. Can you see or can you arrange the priorities of, if you have the decision to change the face of a country, what are the main things that you would do with the children today?
In Egypt or in general?
In general.
I mean,
we're speaking Africa now.
Yes, I'll go back to the Convention, the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Every African nation has signed the Convention of the Rights of the Child. We do say the rights are indivisible and cannot be prioritized. That is the human rights language.
Every time I try to prioritize, you say that.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Very,
however, I mean, one also has to be practical, and I think that if you look at those child indicators I referred to earlier, there are sort of thresholds, you know, over which it's considered an emergency or very serious or critical. So in a country where under 5 mortality is very high, then that's what you work on. If you have to prioritize, that's what you work on first. You're not ranking the rights. All the rights are the same, but you have to put your resources somewhere. So we talk about survival, thriving, and being protected. Those are, if you like, it's not official policy, but we talk, every child has the right to survival, to thrive, and to be protected. Survival is the basics, right? Thriving means the education, you know, which is also pretty basic. The tools, and then protection is the more subtle protections that every girl needs. You know, growing up in a world that can be challenging to be a girl, or somebody who's suffering from abuse or neglect or exploitation, these more tricky issues. So that's kind of the gamut, let's say, of rights. I would prioritize according to the context of the country. And in Egypt, of course, we're a middle-income country. Yeah. There are challenges, but a lot of the basic rights have been met. Yeah. So we can work on the more difficult issues, the more subtle issues, the ones that require more technical expertise.
Yes. And you find this is happening on ground, but maybe the population factor is something that hinders the progress and the speed of the progress.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think Egypt's done very well in managing the discussion around population growth. Of course, population growth is a challenge. At the same time, young people are an enormous dividend and an enormous exciting potential for any country. And you see now, you look at, I don't know which countries, I don't want to name in case I get them wrong, but there are certain developed economies where the population has been weighted the wrong way, and now there's too many old people and not enough young people to keep the economy moving. Egypt has this opportunity still ahead of us to we call it reaping the youth dividend, if you like, because we have a high population growth right now, but there's no country in the world that has not been physically able to manage its population, and Egypt will be able to manage this growing population. I think they're doing the right thing to apply pressure to and provide policies to reduce the number of children per family, as long as it's a free choice, which it is. And we will see that. We'll see that going down. I think in
free choice for their rights, or for the children's rights, for them to grow up in a very well and balanced family, and this is what they deserve.
Yes, and if each parent understands the risks of having more children, then they will choose to have less children. It's logical. It goes hand in hand with education, of course.
So it's not part of the UNICEF work to educate the community about things relating to children's rights. You work directly with the children issues and tactics and programs.
We work also at community level to make sure that people are aware of children's rights. It's actually extremely important. So for example, but I mean, maybe not just all children's rights. We'll focus on some. Right now, for example, in Egypt, we know very well that there is a large number of migrants and refugees, and amongst them, children. So we work at community level to explain to both the host community, which means Egyptians, and the refugee and migrant community, what are child rights? What is your right vis-a-vis education or health? So that kind of work we do absolutely at community level, either with an NGO partner, sometimes with government. We would look at, for example, girls' empowerment. It's very much a community-based approach. But as UNICEF, we are 100 staff in one office. So do we ourselves go down to the field and do that? No, that's not the model. The model is to support the government and civil society organizations to do so. Yeah, and we're there in the field to monitor, to engage, to learn. Every week, my colleagues are out in the field. But we don't take.
Is it your happy days when you're in the field?
It most definitely is.
Really?
I mean, I really enjoy my work. In the office, it's fascinating, and the number of interesting discussions and policy meetings that I'm involved in, and the opportunity to make big change, because if you're talking at senior level on policy, that's big change. But when I remember and remind myself to get out into the field, as we call it, and go into a village and talk to a normal person and meet his or her child and have a little conversation in my basic Arabic, is extremely rewarding and very enjoyable.
And your face shined when you spoke about the field trips.
Yes, of course, of course. I mean, these are the children that we're here to serve.
And you get to know them well.
Yes.
To meet them in person. They're blood and flesh.
And it's very exciting for them as well. They get to meet these exciting people coming into their lives for a minute.
They see you as a British man, and when you speak Arabic, they're very happy with that.
Yes, exactly, yes. Yeah.
Okay, what's your favorite place to go?
Physically?
Yeah.
I would say what I really enjoy doing is going for a walk in Mbaba.
In Mbaba?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. I don't do it enough, but I like to be, let's say, surrounded by people who are just going around, going forward with their own lives, and have no interest in, let's say, tourists particularly, or that kind of thing. I also love downtown. I spend quite a lot of time downtown visiting different people I've come to know over the years, different shopkeepers or different people. I think one of the most beautiful places I've been to in Egypt is Siwa. Absolutely stunning. Wow. Sinai, amazing as well. I mean, frankly, I think I enjoy going anywhere where I can have a conversation and interact with normal people. That's what gives me pleasure.
You know that we call Imbaba. Imbaba, it's a Republic of Imbaba. It's a synonym.
Yes,
it's not
I know. I've heard,
because they have their own style and stuff.
Yeah, very much so.
So interesting.
You know, when I was studying Arabic so my degree is my university degree was Arabic.
Yeah.
And I studied in the 90s, and they sent us to Cairo for a sort of practical period. And I was living in Kitkat. And so that's just walking distance from Imbaba. I mean, that is Imbaba almost. So that's when I got to know that neighborhood.
That's when you started to click the first click with the Imbaba and those people.
ما تكلمنا باللغة العربية.
ما نتكلم. اللغة العربية بتاعتك، العربي بتاعك عربية عامية ولا فصحى؟
أنا اتخرجت باللغة العربية فصحى طبعا، لكن كان لازم ندرس العامية. وعندما بتكلم العامية، لكن عامية شوية من اليمن، شوية من الأردن، وشوية من هنا.
واو. بس دي عامية حلوة قوي. يعني أنت تقدر to hold a conversation أو تتكلم لمدة 3 4 5 دقايق.
لكن لو عن حاجة جدية يعني صعبة.
كده دلوقتي you started to have an accent اللي هو I can tell إن أنت مثلا يمني دلوقتي.
يعني عشت في اليمن 4 سنوات.
So رحلتك في أفريقيا كانت started فين؟
كنت في صوماليا، الصومال، وبعدين رحت موزمبيق. صومال 5 سنوات، موزمبيق 3 سنوات، Central African Republic 3 سنوات، اليمن 4 سنوات.
واو.
صوماليا مرة ثانية 2 سنين، بوروندي 3 سنوات، ودلوقتي هنا.
African guru.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love it. I love every country, I mean, frankly.
أحلى حاجة about your team تحبها في التيم بتاعك في مصر؟
هنا في مصر, they're amazing. I mean,
they are amazing,
the
by
capacity,
the way. You have a great team.
The capacity of our team and their passion for their work is mind-blowing sometimes. I mean, of course, you know, every team has its weaknesses and its strengths, and every individual does, but it's the capacity of our team is really extremely high, higher than other countries where I've worked, I have to say. So that's a real pleasure. And there's a good understanding from our team of the opportunities that we have as UNICEF to influence things for children.
Yeah, they do it from the heart as well. It's not just a job.
Exactly.
Knowing more about you, Jeremy, gives me the impression of a very blessed and diverse global person that has the experience of seeing different cultures and different nature and lived and had and worked there. Definitely, I would love to hear a career advice from you to people who are starting their career. They're still exploring life, not the word. So for the first 5 years of career life, what do you think are the most needed skills for youth today?
Gosh, that's a difficult question. And to be fair, the world is changing constantly. So what may have worked when I was that age, which is, let's say, 20 years ago or so, may not be relevant now. But from my perspective, I did not plan my career. I'm not from that school where I planned out this in order to do this, to do that, to lead to this. What I identified was, what is the sector that I want to work in? That I identified as a teenager.
Really?
And I knew I wanted to work in development. That's a pretty broad sector. But I didn't mind where. I had no particular intention to work for the UN. Although I did have, as I remember now, I suddenly remembered that as a child, I had a UNICEF poster in my room growing up. And that's which is kind of a coincidence that then I ended up working for UNICEF. But so I pursued academic studies that were good for development. When I say I studied Arabic, I actually studied Arabic and social anthropology, and then I did a master's in development studies. So these are all pretty broad, but in that direction.
Yeah.
And then I started looking for voluntary work. And I think what I would say to young people who are starting out now is I think it's extremely important to be ready to learn and to be very humble. I sometimes find myself in conversations with younger people who feel like they are actually the perfect person for that job. Whereas actually they might not be. They might get the job, but maybe they need to go into it with a learning
process.
Learning
mindset.
Learning mindset, exactly. And when I went into my career, I asked to volunteer. That was my first step, was to volunteer for any development organization that I could find in Kenya. I was at home there. And then, eventually I stumbled on a paid job, and eventually, I was actually headhunted by UNICEF, let's say, or asked to apply for a job in UNICEF. I would also say to people, at least this is what someone said to me, under the age of 30, don't be too career orientated. Work where you think you will be interested to work, not whether you think it will be useful for the next job. So you've got those years between university and turning 30 where I believe you should enjoy your work and pursue your passions. And then you're better able to identify what you really want to do. And by the time you get to about 30, you can then start being a little bit more structured in where you want to go.
Everyone now is trying to build his own startup since the college years. It doesn't work for everyone. So they end up sometimes frustrated and they feel they didn't achieve enough. But now you're saying that till 30, work for the things that you love. It worked with you.
It worked with me. Yes, I was saying it doesn't mean it will work with everybody. It worked for me.
Yes.
I guess I had, if I may, I had excellent parenting, and they were consistently supportive of me pursuing my interests, not of you must be a doctor, lawyer, or an engineer kind of thing. They were not those kind of parents, and so I had that sort of, let's say, supportive backdrop from which to do that, and I think we'll all get there.
Wow,
almost all of us.
We all get there.
Yeah.
You believe that slowing down in life give it better chances to enjoy it?
I believe so. And even professionally, right? Obviously, for me, it's obvious anyway. And socially, go slow, take things slow. Professionally, I think there's a tendency now for people to move fast in pursuit of the next promotion. But if you do it too fast and you've got to the highest you can get by the time you're 35, what do you do for the next 30 years? So, I think I certainly would encourage people to take it slow, especially in their 20s. You should enjoy your 20s.
Yeah. Don't stress so much.
Yeah. In 30s, you probably have family obligations. You start to have financial obligations. Life takes on a different turn. So enjoy the 30s. Enjoy the 20s. Be serious about it, but be serious about enjoying it.
I would want to get back and have this advice earlier, because now I started to realize that, yes, we better enjoy it. It's all going to happen.
Slow,
So one thing about volunteering, it's very interesting to me, because the volunteer work is not common. Maybe some people would love to do it, but it's not accessible for everyone. Do you believe that it's part of your progress and your building connections and stuff like that?
I will link it to what I said earlier. I think volunteering, if it's motivated by passion, is an amazing thing. And so I did volunteering, for example, when I was a teenager in a very old-fashioned institution for mentally and physically handicapped people, and they were in terrible circumstances. It was a Victorian era, so 19th century institution they were trying to close, and they had these last few people that they didn't know how to move them into better care. So I would go once a week and take them out for a tea or coffee and chat. And you couldn't talk you couldn't have let's say a conversation that we're having now because of the disabilities that these patients had. I wasn't doing that to prepare myself for any career or to create any connections. I also volunteered. I've done a few different pieces of voluntary work. I was a volunteer teacher for a year in Tanzania, rural Tanzania. Again, purely for interest and passion and learning, but not. It wasn't a calculated part of a career path.
Yes.
So, and
you have to do it by heart.
You have to do it from the heart.
Yeah.
And then if you're motivated by your heart, then that volunteer opportunity that you identify and do, you will, I think, enjoy it more, and secondly, you will capture from it what is so important for your personal growth.
Wow. So it's something from within. Sorry for repeating back what you said, but this is the way how we learn in this show. You said you had an excellent parenting.
I certainly did.
How does this affect the journey and the success of a man
or a woman?
Or a woman,
yes.
definitely.
I think positive positive parenting, or that's the phrase we use here in Egypt. But parenting is absolutely fundamental. If we get parenting right, and there's all the evidence that shows, if you get parenting right and meet a certain basic, simple, let's say, indicators, they are measurable. There's a science to it. If parenting is done correctly, the child has the best start in life. And there's basic parenting, making sure that the child is well nourished and has sort of daycare, nursery care in the early years and that kind of thing. But then there's also the let's say the emotional parenting, which I think is extremely important. And I don't mean smother your child with emotion and care. I just mean
the balance,
getting the balance right.
parenting,
And I think it, if you look at most people who have done well in their lives, it's at least in part thanks to good parenting. Not always. And that's not to say you can't do well without good parenting.
Yes, because I was going to ask you about this. Because what if I didn't have this privilege or chance? So is a self-made man or a woman, it really exists? Because for myself, I don't really think we're ever self-made. We're made from many inputs from the community, from the culture, from parents and from friends and everyone.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And, there are people who've extraordinary success stories of people who come from very underprivileged backgrounds, which might have had good parenting, or backgrounds with no parents. Plenty of good examples. So that's not to say it's the only ingredient. But if as parents you get it right for your children, I think you're giving them such a healthy start in life.
And you save them years, right?
Exactly. You save them years. I have to say, I had such a good upbringing. I can't say I struggled. Alhamdulillah, right?
Alhamdulillah.
I mean, lots of people do struggle, and they get very far, and I think that's even more admirable. But if you have good parents, good parenting, I think it's an excellent start. And that's something that we also promote here in Egypt, positive parenting with the government, which I think is it's about investing in early childhood through positive parenting.
Okay. I don't want to finish that, but before it comes to an end, we usually have something with our special guests like you that we invite them to announce a collaboration, an opportunity, a volunteer activity, whatever you can share for the coming generation or the youth listening to us, because we're very blessed that most of our viewers and listeners are on their 20s, that you just advised us to enjoy to the max. What do you have in mind for them today?
Well, I would mention again Shabab Balad. I think that's a platform which I would like young people who are listening, I'd like you to stay tuned, if you like. It's a collaboration that we hope which will bring skilling and learning, online skilling and learning to young people, and volunteering opportunities. So I think that's quite exciting. I can't say that it's up and running at full capacity yet. This is very much done as a joint collaborative effort between the UN, government, private sector, and young people. But that's one thing. And then the other thing that I would encourage all young people to check out, and it's not something UNICEF is responsible for, is another UN agency called UNV, UN Volunteers. There is a specific subsector of UNV's work which is about youth volunteers. And it's a very well-managed program, and it's international, it's global, and it's here in Egypt as well. So I would check that out as well.
It's an amazing experience, and we'll also advise our viewers to check on and try to see where they can go and how they can learn. And as you said, I'll quote you again, do it with your passion.
I think, I get often, let's say, praise that I don't think I deserve, which is your work as UNICEF, very noble. I mean, UNICEF is very noble, but I'm just Jeremy. I believe every single one of us in the world, regardless of whether you work in, UNICEF or La Poire or Microsoft or you're a street cleaner, we can use our influence around us to fix a little bit of the world. And the world needs fixing. There's a lot, that needs fixing and improving. And it's my personal philosophy that we each have a role to play, regardless of what job you have, regardless if you have any job at all. Even a simple interaction with someone on the street, you could make their day by giving them a smile instead of a blank face, or by saying thank you, by holding a door open, or by helping a child, or by providing a poor person with a meal. There's so many different ways of doing it, but I think I'm very conscious of it. And of course I have my bad days, but when I am being conscious of it, I think I am a better person in this world.
Well, Thank you, Jeremy.
Dina, it was a pleasure to chat to you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope we didn't keep you for your schedule for the day.
Well, now I'm going to an all-staff meeting.
حلقة النهاردة واحنا بنتكلم عن العمل التطوعي، قادرة أشوف إنه ناس كتير مننا مهتمة بالعمل التطوعي، لكن ما عندناش طرق ومجالات نقدر نشتغل فيها فعلا في العمل التطوعي. ما تنساش تتفرج على حلقتنا مع دكتور عبلة الألفي اللي اتكلمنا فيها عن المبادرة الرئاسية 1000 يوم الذهبية وفرص المشاركات الحقيقية للدعم والمشورة، وإنك تكون أنت نفسك سفير لمبادرة تطوعية لصحة وسلامة الأطفال في مصر.
شغل عالي شغل عالي.